Okay, hey everybody, welcome back. Good afternoon to you guys. Hope you're all doing really well. It's Wednesday, April the 22nd, and here we are, and we're getting ready for our critical thinking lecture from 1 to 2:15, Cal State Fullerton. Welcome everybody, hope you guys are doing really good. So we just have a couple of more lecture meetings today and the 2 meetings next week to go over chapter 9. And then after that, it's just down to the review sessions for the final exam and then the test during finals week. So we'll talk a little bit about just, the remaining dates and aspects of the schedule once 1 o'clock comes. But anybody showing up early to attend this live stream, welcome guys. Good to see you. Hope you're all healthy and safe right now. And yeah, I just have the camera rolling. But there's about 10 minutes till class time, so feel free to just chill and get ready. Okay. Be right back. Welcome, guys. Plenty of time, so thanks for being here. Cool, good to see you guys. See a few people arriving to the live stream, so hope you guys are having a good day and a nice week. And, as usual, anybody can feel free at any time to say hello, comment, ask any questions. Interaction is good for everybody, so let me know if there's anything I can help you with at any time, whether it's in these few minutes before class lecture starts, during the meeting, through email, and all of the above. Just saying, I'm always ready to assist any student with any questions, so just putting it out there. But to those of you already watching, nice to see you. Hello, hello. Just a few minutes and we'll be ready to get going. All right, guys, good to see everyone. Got a little group so far. Just a few minutes till 1. But nice to be here with you guys as we close out the last few weeks of the semester. Hi, Priscilla. Hey there. And to all the rest of you guys, go ahead and just say hi, or let me see if you don't mind. Quick little comment. It's great to see people, and therefore, I can get a sense of who's in the room, who's, well, not in the room, but, who's attending this live stream. So say hi. Don't be shy. And, we're all going to get through this meeting today and talk a little bit about the next couple of class meetings. Hey, Peter, Jennifer, Michelle, Sergio, once again, good to see all you guys. Appreciate your faithful attendance and your attention to the course. Jennifer, Eduardo, likewise, good to see you guys. Okay, just hanging in there for another few moments, and then we'll get our meeting underway today. Okay, everybody, well, it's pretty much time. Hey, Juliana, and to all the others, great to see you guys. Hoping you're having a just really good week and, closing out the semester strong to the best of your ability. So here we are, it's week 13, it's Wednesday, April the 22nd, and let me just start off with a couple of basic statements about where we are in the semester. So thanks everybody for your participation in the quiz on Monday. I received all of the quizzes that were submitted, and therefore, I'm working on grading them, and they'll definitely be done as soon as possible. I have a couple of other grading tasks that I'm responsible for also at this time, so it might not be like right away. Maybe I'll have them ready for you no later than next Wednesday at the latest. But my best intention is to have them all completely graded by Monday. So one way or the other, you'll get that grade ready for you next week, either on the Monday or the Wednesday meeting, and I'll just notify the class over Titanium when we're all ready, and then you can simply ask for your score on the recently completed quiz. Okay, so we just did our quiz on science. Now that is behind us. So you've taken 3 quizzes. That's all that the class has. You've completed 3 homework assignments, and you've taken a midterm. So there's just 2 things left for you, actually. There's 1 more homework assignment and then the final. Now, can anybody just verify that you received the instructions for the homework? Because I mailed that out just a little while ago today. I think at around, according to my records here, 11 a.m. Anybody notice the message? Okay, good, Peter and others. So yeah, that was just sent through Titanium to everybody. That's the directions on how to do your 4th and last homework assignment. So basically, you got to complete that, and then we'll be working towards the final exam and reviewing for that. Okay, good, everybody. I see you guys telling me. That's very helpful. So yeah, I have the instructions here on my phone. So I thought one time while we're all just assembled and looking at this live stream lecture, I'll talk to you about the prompt. Well, not the prompt, but about the assignment. Okay. So I'm reading just off directly the email, and then I'll talk about it once I'm done reading. It says, "Dear students, hello again. Hope you're doing great. Below you'll see the directions for the 4th and last homework assignment." Now here's something to notice. I changed the due date just slightly. So in the original syllabus, it was listed to be due next Wednesday, the 29th. Yeah. But anyway, it's not going to be due on that day. Instead, it's been moved to Monday, May the 4th. I incorrectly wrote that it was originally due date April 30th, but whatever. I had intended to write 29th because that's next Wednesday. So all I'm saying is it's due Monday the 4th of May. That's an adjustment of 5 days out, as opposed to Wednesday the April 29th. You're going to submit it electronically to me through email no later than class time, Monday the 4th. So you basically have a little extra time to work on it, and I thought that was reasonable because of how a couple things got moved around, obviously, this semester with the whole pandemic and stuff. So it's due Monday, May 4th. And here's what it says. So you have to watch a 30-minute television newscast. This assignment is all about critical analysis of news and the media. So basically, I'm trying to get you guys to critically dissect, break down, analyze a news broadcast. So you have to find a 30-minute television news show. This could be local news. It could be national news, like on one of the cable news networks. It's something that if it's a 1-hour newscast, you're only responsible for watching 30 minutes of it. So it may be that it's a 30-minute like evening news, Channel 7. It may be that it's a 1-hour block of news and you just watch 30 minutes of it, but you're responsible for fully viewing and critiquing 30 minutes of news. I want it to be televised news broadcasts. I know there's a lot of people out there that just do podcasts and blogs and like YouTube channels, but I kind of want it to be critical analysis of news media that's provided through television broadcasts. So that's the ideal. Now, I know since I've taught this class many times and I've seen different issues that come up, sometimes students don't even have a television or they just completely get all of their news through the internet. Well, look, ideally, I would like you to watch it on a TV. But if that's not possible, then you could just find an archived news broadcast that has been uploaded to a streaming service like YouTube. But it has to be something that was originally broadcast on television and then only later provided through some web service. Okay, so I want it to derive from televised news, and if you're not capable of actually watching a real live TV set, then I'll allow you to, as a substitute for that, just watch, some kind of news broadcast that's been uploaded from perhaps the broadcaster to their official YouTube channel, and it's just got to be 30 minutes of content either way. Okay, so as it continues, watch a 30-minute television newscast. Now, what you have to do basically is write down, first of all, there's a timekeeping element to this assignment. So one aspect of it is you need to keep a log of all the stories that were reported on in the 30 minutes. So I need you to kind of keep an itemized list of each story, and then tell me how much time was spent on each story. So that means you have to have like a time measurement device, like a stopwatch, and you have to show me the time signature for each of the stories reported down to the minutes and seconds. So I want you to keep precise accounting of time. So one document that you submit to me is just going to list the stories with like a little couple of words just about what the story was, and then the time in terms of minutes and seconds that was given to that story. Also on that page, you could provide the identifying information of the broadcast. So I want you to have at least these pieces of info included. The original time that this was broadcast and the date, the station that it was broadcast from, and the name of the news show. So I mean, if it was like, this could be, for example, Anderson Cooper, CNN, Thursday, April 23rd at 8 p.m. And then you would list the stories given in the window of 30 minutes together with the time signature of each one. And then after that, okay, separate from that, you're then going to write a little 2-page report, typed report, where you try to critically break down the content and quality of the broadcast. So I'm going to read more from the text here. It says, okay, watch a 13-minute television newscast. Write down each story that is presented and the time spent in seconds and minutes on each story. Then write a 2-page typed report in which you evaluate the choice of stories the newscast presented and the overall news value in terms of content and quality. Continuing, it says, use the tools of critical thinking you have learned in this class, and remember that a good critical thinker will be able to spot problems, find fallacies, and generally find fault with what they see. Okay, so you basically have to do that. You have to try to be critical. You have to have a critical approach to your engagement with this news broadcast. And it can be of any source. We're talking local news, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. You know, you just have to try and locate a 30-minute TV show that shows the news. Tell me the station, date, time, and name of the show. List each story provided in every single one. Don't just have a couple of the big ones, but each story that was shown in the 30 minutes. Provide the time designated or devoted to the topic of each story, and then you have your 2-page report separate from that. Now, in this 2-page report, it's kind of like your capstone writing assignment for this class. So that's where you kind of get to put on display your knowledge of course concepts. So if you see like fallacious reasoning, rhetoric, misleading arguments, poor analogies, anything of this kind, then you would note it and mention it in your 2-page written report. A more successful assignment is going to be one that tries to find more fault and make more criticisms. Critical thinking is about being critical. So if you just wrote a report where it was like, the news was great, it was very informative, I found it really useful, and I went about my day afterwards, and everything's great in the world. That's, I mean, I want you to try and find some room for criticisms, okay? And so to do that, you have to try and provide some critique. Now, another thing about this, if there's any attempt by the broadcaster of the news program to influence or shape or manipulate the viewer's perspective, then you should mention that too. That can include body language, tone of voice, also things like lighting, graphics, music, sometimes like scary music or, you know, weird looking font or graphics can sometimes enhance or shape, I guess, the perspective of the viewer, leading them to judgments that perhaps the broadcaster or purveyor of the news wants you to take. So that's really it. It's critical analysis of news media based on a 30-minute viewing, and you'll turn in the documents to me where you list the stories and then also your 2-page report. One other thing too, when it comes to the time allotted to the various stories, that can be some part of the basis of your critique. Because what you would actually find if you watch, for example, local news, is that there are a disproportionate amount of time given to less significant stories, a lot of the time anyway. So like back when we had sports, because now we have no sports, there'd be like an inordinate amount of time given to the sports reporting, the weather, entertainment, lifestyle, celebrity gossip, and things like that. So, I mean, if you saw that there was like 3 minutes given to like celebrity breakup news and 30 seconds given to like governor's decisions about the closure of states during the coronavirus, then you might make a mention of that, saying, well, the news channel or institution that provides this information didn't seem to want to give as much info to the people about issues that actually impact their lives in a significant way. So maybe it serves as being less informative, less quality content. Okay, so I mean, that's about it. The last thing is this, okay? A couple last points. I don't want you to really watch something I'm telling you that some people could watch archived news that they found on an internet source, originally broadcast through TV, but then later placed in an online setting to be replayed. If you do that, I would just ask, please, that you find news that's two things. It speaks to the American people. I've seen people before find news like, it's like news from Chinese state news or Singapore or, some specific country in Europe, like Sky News or whatever, talking to just Italians. I would like it to be news that's provided for an American audience, okay? It doesn't mean that it can't have international stories involved, but I would like it to be, originally broadcast to the United States. And I would also like it to be a little more current, right? So I would not prefer news that's from like 2015, 2010, because news, by definition, is new stuff, and that's old news. So if you find something that's archived and you're not watching, a live TV broadcast, then just try to find something that's a little more up to date so that the news that you're looking at is relevant to our present time. Also, you cannot watch comedy news or satire. Sometimes though, like Comedy Central, news shows like The Daily Show or John Oliver, they actually sometimes do have a lot of important and valuable information, but it's laced with such irony, sarcasm, and humor that I kind of want us to be a little more traditional news in this case. So yeah, not provided for the sake of entertainment or laughs, but a bona fide news hour that you will find. Okay, so that's just me telling you guys a little bit about our fourth homework. It's due not next week, but the following Monday, Monday, May 4th. And I can't think of much else to say at this time, but does that at least sound clear? Do anyone have questions about it? If so, definitely you can let me know here, there, anywhere, email, through the live stream, or by any means. So just homework 4, all good, all clear? I just wanted to devote the first few minutes of the meeting today to the description of that homework assignment. And yet again, I'm reminding you that if you go to your Titanium messages, your email from Fullerton, you'll see the discussion, the instructions about this homework there too. So if you didn't watch this live stream, or if you forget what I'm saying now, you can either replay it or just go to the written version of the notes on the assignment in Titanium. Are we all good? I just kind of want to make sure everyone's satisfied with that description of the assignment. Who can tell me if you feel like that's good? If you don't, that's fine too, and you can let me know. All right, Jennifer, Peter, and a couple of other people. Okay, I appreciate that. So we're good to go. So then in the class overall, we've come down to the last chapter in our book that we're going to study. It's not the last chapter chronologically in the order of the chapters, but the last thing that we're going to study together. It's chapter 9. And chapter 9 is all about ethics, which is another important subject matter for philosophy and for everyday life. So let's start talking about ethics, chapter 9. Okay, so through this semester, we've taken a real tour through many important topics in the world of critical thinking, starting with just what are arguments, what are deductive arguments versus inductive arguments, what is validity, soundness, inductive strength, What does it mean for a proposition to be true, to believe a proposition? What are different forms of deductively valid argument, modus ponens, modus tollens? We talked about qualities that good critical thinkers have. What are barriers to being a good critical thinker? Then we started to talk a little bit about language, the concept of knowledge, and then it was all about fallacies, right? And then just now we've done a couple of extra things. We talked about the media for a bit and science, right? So now the last chapter from our class to get ready to learn is this, chapter 9, which is all about the concept of ethics. So ethics, it's a word that I'm probably thinking some of you guys have encountered at least a few times in your life. What comes to your mind if somebody says ethics? Like, what do you think that word ethics is all about? It's all about a certain range of concepts that are related to each other. If a little kid came up to you and said, hey, my teacher said something about ethics, but I don't even know what the word means. Can you please tell me, what will you say to this person? Ethics. Okay, Omar, so you're putting out morals. Good. That's in the right ballpark. Exactly. What are some other synonymous kind of buzzwords that get raised when we talk about ethics? Eduardo, you say a group of people making a set of rules for a society to follow and accept. Well, that's pretty nihilistic, don't you think, Eduardo? Like, there's no actual thing about right and wrong. It's just rules. Like, if they say the rule is kill your parents, then that's ethical. I don't think so. I mean, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So in the more deep sense, I kind of like the initial attempt that you're giving, Omar, when you say morals. I was going to follow up on that by asking, let's go further. What are other words? Michelle, you say beliefs. And I think I know what you mean. Like, you're thinking beliefs, like what you believe is right and wrong. But beliefs themselves don't necessarily always have to do with the concept of morality. Like, if I believe that there's tea in this cup, that's not about justice or injustice. That's just what I think is true. So beliefs is almost, I think, a little bit under specific. Beliefs about particularly, and then we get back to Omar's terminology, beliefs about the concept of morality. So what are synonyms or buzzwords that have to do with morals, ethics? We're talking here about the difference between what and what. When you think about ethics, when people talk to you about ethics, or when you talk to other people about ethics, we're making judgments about what type of things. About, just put it all out there, you know, let's open up this discussion. Values, okay, good, another good contribution. Omar, you say morals, you say values. That's right. Anybody else has something along those same lines? Right versus wrong. Okay, good. Now we're definitely making some progress. Right versus wrong. It's all about morality. So let me return to the board for a minute and provide a few statements that will bring this into good focus. So ethics, what is it? Ethics is the study of morality and moral concepts. So that is what ethics is. It is the study of morality and moral concepts. And what I want to write down on the board next, having just defined the word ethics, are what are some of these moral concepts and terms that are familiar to the world of ethics. Okay, so moral concepts is next. So here we have some basic moral concepts that are the subject matter of ethics. Basic moral concepts. All right, guys. So I'm going to go starting with Thomas here. Right versus wrong. Now, if we're going to try and describe ethics through the framework of right versus wrong, what is another pair of terms that kind of gives expression to a similar divide? Like, you know, words that have a similar resonance or meaning to right versus wrong, but maybe a different pairing. You could say right versus wrong, Or you could say blank versus blank. What's another pair of moral concepts that contrast with each other? Right versus wrong is the right sort of format here, or genre of term. Okay, so Kayla, you're giving me good and evil. That's also very good. Good versus bad, sometimes say, but I'll go with evil. It's even a little more powerful description of the negative side of that divide. So we've got right and wrong, good and evil. What's another, if you can, pair of terms that expresses moral differences? We could say an action was right, we could say it was wrong. We could say it was good or evil. We can also claim of actions or behaviors that they are what other two possibilities? It's all along the same theme, you know? Right, wrong, good, evil. Maybe what's another one? Anyone have another option to put up there? Let's see what you have. Or if you don't have something, maybe I'll try and tease it out of you, but let's see. We're doing good. We're making good progress on this. So you say just versus unjust. That's nice as well, Walden, yeah. You say justified versus unjustified. Well, that has sometimes to do with what evidence you have. Like maybe I don't have justification for believing that there will be a vaccine for this virus in the next 3 weeks, because there's not good scientific evidence that we can produce it that fast. But being justified or unjustified in the epistemic sense just refers to whether you have evidence for something or not. But I like Walden's example here, just versus unjust. Just in the moral sense is not the same concept as justification in the epistemic sense. So sometimes we look at a person's behavior and we say they did something just, you know, and righteous or whatever. And on the other hand, sometimes we look at behavior or institutions or practices and we say those are unjust, you know, bad practices. There's also just moral versus, have you heard this? Moral versus immoral? Okay, and you know, the list could continue. I mean, there's many ways of phrasing these differences among ethical behaviors, but I'm just going to put one more, and that is because it has to do with how we should act. So it's also related to how one ought versus how one ought not to act, how you should versus how you shouldn't act. So how one ought versus ought not act. Okay, so we have here a cluster of terms and ideas that are related to ethics, that are of the substance of ethics. And when we judge people's behavior, or when we judge the results of some action, and we say what the person did was wrong, we are making a moral judgment. We're making an ethical decision about what was right or wrong. And sometimes we make, you know, positive moral judgments. We say this person that volunteered to work at the hospital, putting their life at risk to try and mitigate the impact of this coronavirus. You look at that and you don't just feel neutral, like, oh, it's neither good nor bad, it's just something. Most people would have the moral sensibility to say, well, that is good, right, just, moral. It's how a person, maybe if they're an ideal moral being, ought to act. And when you see someone, I don't know, murder somebody in cold blood just for no good reason, maybe because they just hate that type of person for no valid reason, then you can say that is wrong. That's evil. That's unjust. That's immoral, you know? So there's lots of behaviors that either we ourselves commit or that we observe other people commit that become the subject matter of moral judgment. And of course, we human beings are unique in that way because we hold each other accountable to these moral standards. If people step outside of the conception of right and wrong that we've established as humans, then we certainly have invented systems to punish, prevent, and to the greatest extent possible, mitigate or eliminate those behaviors. So morality is deeply rooted in the whole human form of life. If it wasn't, then we would just be, I guess, in a state of perpetual chaos, looting from each other, hurting each other for no good reason, taking things that we wanted instead of working for them, and all of that. So we're learning about ethics, and we're going to try and develop a more substantial understanding of it, but we're starting from scratch. So I just started by telling you that ethics is all about morality and moral concepts. It's the study of morality and moral concepts. What are moral concepts? Well, they're things like these: right, wrong, good, bad, just, unjust, moral, immoral, how you should or how you should not act. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you guys about concerning ethics is that there's three major types of actions that are spoken of in ethics. So there's three main types of ethical action, and that's what I'm going to put up here. Three main types of, let me just say it this way. Three main types of actions in ethics. Okay. So when it comes to the classification of behavior in the moral sense, there are three predominant categories that actions can be placed into. So we're starting up here at the top. One of those categories of action is what are called morally impermissible actions. Morally impermissible. Okay, and I'm just going to write the three types, and then we'll go over those definitions and definitely get into some examples. So one type of action in ethics are actions that we call morally impermissible. Another type are actions that are the opposite of this. Those are morally permissible. And then finally, a third possible category are actions deemed morally obligatory. Okay, so we're going to start up here at the top, and let's just think about it from a point of view of common sense. What would you think that that term means, morally impermissible? If an action is morally impermissible, what do you think we're saying about it? It's something that if you do it, you are doing something wrong. Okay, so morally impermissible actions are just actions that are wrong, and in other words, maybe a little less formally, they're not okay to do. So I'll put that here. Morally impermissible, in other words, actions that are wrong. And just to make that perfectly clear, they are not okay to do. Morally impermissible, standing for actions that are wrong, that are not okay to do. Okay, so let's spend a moment on this and think of some examples, perhaps. Well, since you now heard the definition of morally impermissible, things that are wrong, things that are not okay to do, people may do them. They may be physically possible, of course, to do. And they are in a lot of cases, obviously, but they're not morally okay to do. So what do you think could be one maybe example of something that maybe everyone can agree is clearly in the camp of being morally impermissible behavior? What do you think could be such a case? Let's see what you have on mind. So think about that. What would you reach for to give me an example? Okay, just going straight up there to murder. I see you guys, Walden and Michelle, but that's good. Go straight for the top, I guess, some of the worst stuff you could do. All right, so murder, right? Murder. Murder's killing innocent people without any valid reason, maybe for the sake of sadistic pleasure or some other kind of weird vendetta. So murder. It's got to be one of the worst things you can do. It's high up there on the scale of morally impermissible actions. Nobody would look at a murderer and say, that's okay, go ahead, you know, there's nothing wrong about that. So certainly one thing that we can probably hopefully agree is wrong. What else? It's not the only wrong thing. There's much more besides just murder. So what else do you think could be in that spectrum of morally impermissible? Maybe not as grave as murder, or maybe even worse. But what do you think could be a second example? Now that we're on the right track, what do you think? Murder was a good starting point. Anything else? Arson. Okay, Michelle, like setting fire to public property or private property. Surely I would say that that is immoral and is morally impermissible. Now, as a philosopher, you're trained to always try and think of counterexamples. So when you say arson, I start wondering in my mind, could there be a morally permissible act of arson? Like, what if you are committing arson against, I don't know, like a facility that is itself the proprietor of an unjust status quo? But as long as people are not harmed in it, I don't know. That'd be a perhaps difficult argument to make. But in general, yes, I understand what you're saying. Jennifer, you say scamming somebody, right? Like someone sends an email and says, give me your bank account number, and if you forward me $5,000, I'll make sure that you get this huge sum deposited from this prince in another country. That could be a scam, of course. It's manipulating the person, taking advantage of them. So I would say that's probably morally impermissible as well. Walden, you give the example of robbing someone, stealing from them. Yes, to steal is to, by definition, take things that you've not earned through labor or through other valid transfer of property from A to B. So it's not permitted because obviously the person who you've stolen from did not give it as a gift, otherwise it would not have been theft. So yeah, there's lots of examples. All the way from the top of the significance and severity down to the things that are a little more minimal. Genocide, rape, torture, you know, that's way up there on the far extremes of how bad anything could possibly be. And then you have murder, lying, stealing, cheating, and other lesser things. So let's move on to the next category. Now that we've established the first, what do you think it would mean to say that an action is not morally impermissible, but on the other hand, on the contrary, it's morally permissible? And you can kind of think about this definition and use it to formulate the proper definition of this new term. So if what's morally impermissible is stuff that is wrong and not okay to do, what do you think morally permissible is, if it's to the contrary of that? Impermissible means wrong and not okay. So what do you think permissible is? Morally permissible. Okay, so you say actions that are correct. I understand what you mean, because when you think of the opposite of wrong, probably most of you have the word right in your mind, or even just good. And that's not wrong at all. That's basically the right idea. But let me state it in this precise way so that we don't get confused. I would say it this way. Morally permissible actions are simply just actions that are not wrong. They're not wrong, and therefore they are okay to do. Okay, so let me put that here. Actions that are not wrong and, in other words, they are okay to do. Now, the only reason that I wanted to resist using the stronger label, actions that are good or correct, is because although actions that are good and correct are morally permissible, it's not limited to such examples. It's just anything and everything that you could not be morally blamed for, even if it doesn't produce any hugely beneficial effect. So when you think of good and righteous actions, you might think of like noble acts of self-sacrifice, you know, donating blood, helping a homeless shelter, or whatever, you know, giving of yourself to some worthy cause. And surely those things are morally permissible. But also included in the scope of morally permissible actions are all those little daily things that don't have much moral valence at all, but are still not wrong things to do. Like, so say, for example, I'm wearing this striped shirt. I don't know if you can see it too good through the camera that you're watching me on, but, you know, I have a lot of shirts, and I could have worn a different one. But there's nothing morally wrong about me wearing this one. So the fact that I'm dressed in this particular fit, it's morally permissible, but it's also not something that's like saving anyone's life or preventing harm to anybody. So understand that morally permissible actions span a pretty big range. You know, you taking this class, morally permissible, nothing wrong about that. If you give to charity, that's morally permissible. If you, I don't know, if you do weird stuff that's kind of like not necessarily advisable, but it certainly doesn't hurt anybody, then you could call that morally permissible as well. Like, what if I wanted to sleep in the kitchen tonight instead of my bedroom, just for the random sake of changing things up. Is that morally permissible? Yes, it is, because it's my house, it's my property, and therefore I'm free to use the facilities here as I would like, even if it might hurt my back. So just understand, morally permissible actions cover a big range, all the way up to and including like valorous acts of sacrifice and service, all the way down to just things that don't have any ability to be blamed for, that don't produce a victim, that don't harm anybody. So a lot, hopefully that's coming clear to you guys. Morally permissible actions are just all those things that are not wrong. Can you give me an example of any actions that are morally permissible? Let's see if you can throw out just a few. They're going to be random, I know, but I figured it'd be easy because this group, I know you guys, and I think that you're a pretty moral group of people. So just thinking of your own behavior, I would say, right, almost 100% of it comes from this category, right? Because you never do anything wrong. So what do you think could be some examples of morally permissible behavior? Unless you're like, wait, I've never done anything good or right, or everything I've done is wrong, so this is really stumping me. No, I'm just kidding. What do you think could be some morally permissible actions? Just to see some from you, because I know I just mentioned a whole bunch, but what could be like in that camp? You're quick to jump on impermissible, murder, arson, robbery. That was great. What's not wrong in this world to do? Anything? Let me see what you think. Drinking tea. Okay, not a problem, yes. As you see right over there, I'm not a bad person or anything just because I'm drinking tea. Now, I mean, we can always imagine some weird scenarios. Charity, just existing. Well, the thing about existence, though, is it's not really an action, is it? I mean, you're just born. It's not like you were a disembodied soul and then you made a choice. Let me be born. That wouldn't be bad. You just find yourself existing, obviously. But yes, I mean, nothing wrong with the fact that you exist, obviously. But I'm just saying it might not be considered an action per se. Community service, sure. Exercising also sounds fine. It's hard for me to think of examples where any of those things could be judged as immoral or as wrong. So good. Seems like we're on the same page, at least with these first two. So then we're going to move on to the third that you see below. Now, morally obligatory. The words themselves, you already have your vocabulary in mind. And so I think just you can understand the meaning of this simply by using common sense inference. What do you think it means to say an action is, it's not merely morally permissible, it's over and beyond that, morally obligatory. What do you think this means? Those are actions that what? If you had to guess. The morally obligatory actions could be thought of as actions that are, what might you say? The phrasing, the wording is like a giveaway. So what could it be? Morally obligatory? Good, right. Things that you must do. Things that you must do morally. So they're like morally obligated of you. They're morally mandatory instead of being morally optional. So they're things that you must do, and it would actually be wrong to what? To not do them. Okay, so let me put that here. Actions that you must do, wrong not to do. Wrong, or in other words, not okay to not do. Okay, so morally obligatory actions are a little bit even stronger in a way than morally permissible, because with these, it's not just that you may do them, but that you have to do them, and it would actually be wrong if you did not. Morally permissible does not imply that it's an obligation, only that it's not wrong. So what do you think? Now, this one I understand, at least the first attempt, you might find a little hard to come up with a clear example, but I'd like to see if you could try. What could you judge as perhaps a morally obligatory action? Not optional, it's mandatory. Not doing it would be wrong. Okay, so you say taking care of a pet, Eduardo. All right, I can agree with that, I think. But let me just think of your example for a moment. First of all, the taking in of a pet is not a moral obligation, I guess, right? Like, you're not morally obligated to take ownership of a pet in the first place because you're at liberty, right, to remain unattached to an animal. But if you have taken a pet, right, you've accepted this pet into your home and you've taken it on, I would argue, yes, that you do have a moral obligation to provide for its care and its upkeep until the end of its natural life or until it becomes incapable of survival at late stages of life. Why is that a moral obligation? Because you've generated this dependency that the pet has on you by bringing it into your home. So it would be very strange for a person to say, yeah, I took this animal from the animal shelter, but I'm not obligated to feed it. I just want to watch it die of starvation. I mean, that would definitely be immoral. So I would say there you have a moral obligation, not just that you're permitted to take care of your pet, but that you must. That's a fair example, yeah. How about this, okay? Say you make a promise to a person, right? It's not a legal contract, but you promise them. You say, I put it on everything, you have my word. Like they need a ride from the airport, and they're kind of worried about how they're going to find their way back. And so you tell the person, you know what, I can give you a ride, I promise. When do you need the ride? Is it 12 on Saturday at noon? Yeah, okay. Look, I swear, you can count on me. I promise you I'll be there at noon. Once you make that promise, you have now got a moral obligation to what, you guys think? Making the promise of your future behavior, promising that action, now establishes an obligation, a moral obligation to what? Easy enough, but I just like to see it and make sure that it's coming through to you. I made a promise, let's say to pick someone up from the airport, but it could be for anything, but just off that example, I made this promise. So when I make the promise, I created a moral obligation to what? What do you say? Yeah, well, you saying to be there, and that's basically correct. In other words, to keep the promise. Whatever the content of the promise is, you're obligated to follow through. If you wanted to have the freedom and the permission to not pick this person up, then you should not have promised them to do that, right? But a promise kind of commits you to the promised action. It's sort of similar to, I don't know, wedding vows, right? That's just a promise in a way, but it's a very significant promise because it's made in front of your friends and family, the state, and if you believe in God, in front of God. So you promise to love, honor, obey, remain faithful to your spouse. I would say that generates a moral obligation to keep that vow. So promising establishes moral obligations. Here's another interesting point to raise. There's a logical connection between these two categories, okay? Because not doing things that are morally impermissible, like refraining from murder, rape, lying, stealing, whatever, not doing those things is a moral obligation. And not performing your moral obligations is morally impermissible. So like not keeping a promise is wrong. And not killing people is an obligation. So you can always sort of see that little connection between those top and bottom concepts there. Now, here's something I want to also mention about the difference between permissible and obligatory. Morally permissible actions, you may do so, but you don't have to. If they're morally obligatory, though, then they have to be done. So every action that's morally obligatory is by extension permissible because you cannot be obligated to do something wrong, but not every morally permissible action is obligatory. Okay, so did we say that me wearing this shirt is morally permissible? Yeah. But question, am I morally obligated to be wearing this shirt right now? Is that also true? And I hope you can understand, no. I mean, I'm permitted to wear it. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But it's also that I have my other choices. It's not that I'm obligated to wear this one. So morally permissible acts are not in every single case obligations. In many cases, they're just things that you're allowed to do that are not harmful, that don't violate the moral law, but yet they're not strict obligations. And on the other hand, morally obligatory actions are obligatory. They're obligations, so you have to do them. Now, I want to make one more point, but before we go into the next section of these notes. I kind of want you guys to understand that when we talk about morality and moral obligations and things that are morally impermissible or permitted, we are not talking about, at least not directly talking about legal standards. We're not talking about legal, illegal when we talk about moral and immoral. When we say something's morally permissible, that does not always mean that it's legal. And when we say something's morally impermissible, that doesn't always mean that it's illegal. When we say that something's morally obligatory, that doesn't always mean that it has the same thing to do with the law. Okay, so the reason there's a difference there is because morality is used to judge the moral character of law itself. So morality and moral judgment is independent of legal code. Can you think of, for example, any action or practice that has ever existed which was at one time legal, but we could probably agree is just immoral? Even when or if it was legal, it was still wrong, and people should not have been doing it. What do you think could be an example of a practice or institution that was legal for a while, but fairly you could say was wrong? And by giving me an example like this, we're going to explain and show that there's a difference between law and morality. Because basically, okay, so you're going with slavery. And Kayla, you talk about death sentence, which is a little more controversial because, of course, there are many current day advocates of it. But let me go with the example of slavery because that's pretty, I think, clear and uncontested by all. So slavery, of course, was legal in this country and in a lot of other countries for a long time in world history. But we don't really think that while it was legal, it was actually good and righteous. And only after the Constitution was amended, only after the 14th Amendment, did it become immoral. That's the wrong way to think about it. It was always immoral. It was an odious, unjust institution. It's a stain on our national history and conscience. So it was wrong even when it was permitted under the law. People like Harriet Tubman, right, who facilitated the escape of slaves in the Underground Railroad, are usually thought of as, by historians, of as heroes, moral heroes, right? But they were breaking the law as it existed at the time at which they lived. So if there was no difference between law and morality, then we would always condemn morally the people who break laws, even if the laws are unjust. Take yourself into Nazi Germany, for example. Was it illegal to give safe harbor to Jewish people like they did in the Anne Frank house? Yes. But are these people evil and immoral because they did that? No. It was because the Nazi regime itself was establishing unjust laws that opposition to those laws was the moral behavior to expect from people. So anyways, just know that not in every single case of an action that is criminalized do we say that it's immoral. The freeing of slaves was a criminal act. The safe harbor of Jews in Nazi Germany was a criminal act, but those are not immoral actions according to like an enlightened view of morality that we probably can agree with. Some people believe that they have the moral right to recreationally use drugs like marijuana or whatever. And whether or not I believe that, it's a possibility. And so some people might say that when the law tells me that I could be punished for, using those substances, that law itself is bad and immoral. And to disobey it is no vice, at least not in a moral sense. So there can be illegal actions that are not immoral. There can be legally allowed actions that are immoral. And know this too, legal obligation is not the same as moral obligation. I can have a moral obligation to do something that I have no legal obligation to do. Remember I gave you the example of keeping a promise to pick up the person at the airport? Okay, so is that a legal obligation that I entered into when I made the promise? No. It's not like I have an enforceable contract with them. And so if they're waiting at the airport and it's 12 and it's 12:30 and it's 1, and they're like, where's my friend? He promised to give me a ride. Is he caught in traffic? Let me call him. Calls me up and he's like, what's up? I'm still waiting for you. You know, we promised that you'd be here at 1, right? Or that you'd be here at noon, so you're a little late. Can you tell me what's up? And then you're on the other end of the line like, well, I'll tell you exactly what's up. You're just a loser. You trusted me. I'm laughing at you. I think it's funny, when people trust my promises and then I get to break them. It's like, that's tons of laughs for me. So you're a loser. Anyway, good luck getting home. I don't know how you're going to do it. Now, if you do that, did you do something that violated a moral obligation? Sure. But can the person on the other end of the line be like, okay, well, I hope you have your story straight because there's going to be police officers at your house. I'm calling the cops. You promised to pick me up at this airport, so you just broke the law. It's not that you broke the law, but you did violate a moral obligation that you did generate. So when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about this deeper source of moral judgment that is even deeper rooted than the law itself. It's ethical standards that we use to judge the establishment of laws. And the legislators who approve laws and put them into the system, they're not like omniscient gods. They obviously can establish laws that don't reflect our shared sense of morality. On the other hand, though, having gone through this effort to demonstrate to you guys how law and moral standards can be different from each other, I don't want you to take it too far in the other direction either and think that the law is just completely conventional and has nothing to do with what's right and wrong. Obviously, in the most prevalent case and for the most part, the laws that we establish do reflect our shared sense of right and wrong as a society, as a community. But there can be exceptions where bad laws are established or good laws are not approved of. And if there was no such ability to morally condemn or criticize law, then people who engage in civil disobedience or protest would simply be regarded as deviant, immoral people. And that's really not true. So anyways, talking to you guys about ethics today, getting started on this subject, and let me just kind of trace our steps and tell you where we've gotten to so far. We have a little bit more, of course, 2 more lectures on this, but to this point anyway, I told you that Chapter 9 is about ethics, and ethics itself is the study of morality and moral concepts. And moral concepts include things like these: right, wrong, good, bad, moral, immoral, just and unjust, how a person ought to act, how a person ought to not act. And then I've told you that there are 3 major types of actions in the world of ethics, and there are these 3 types that you see written. Some actions are deemed morally impermissible, in other words, wrong things that are not okay to do, lying, cheating, killing, etc. On the flip side of that, morally permissible actions, things that are not wrong and that are okay to do, like you watching this lecture right now. No problem with that, not wrong, so it's permitted morally. Finally, actions are morally obligatory, means they must be done, it's wrong not to do them, like the keeping of promises, the taking care of one's children if they've got custody over them, and the non-performance of any morally impermissible act. Okay, so moral decisions face us every day, all the time, big and small. What actions should we take? What causes should we support? What behaviors should we criticize on a moral basis? When we make these decisions about what actions are right or wrong, or what we should or should not do, we are engaged in that time in moral reasoning. So let me put that definition up here next. What is moral reasoning? So it's when you make a decision about what actions are right or wrong, or about what you should or should not do. Okay, so when you make a decision, when you the individual, choose or decide what action you think is morally right or wrong, or what you yourself should or should not do, that's when you engage in moral reasoning. So the whole class we're learning about here is critical thinking, critical reasoning. Sometimes when we reason, we're just trying to determine what's true and false. When we morally reason, we're trying to make a judgment about what's right or wrong. So that's what it does involve. It's whenever you make a determination about what actions are right or wrong, or what you should or shouldn't do. So if you're sitting back and you look at old footage of the civil rights protests that were occurring after the Rosa Parks bus boycott, and you see people marching peacefully, getting hit by water cannons and stuff, and you think, what the police did there was wrong. You're making a moral judgment. You're engaged in moral reasoning. Or if you look at the protesters and you think those were righteous people that were, putting pressure on the system for the establishment of their full equality in society, what they did was good and just. Now you're making a positive moral judgment. So we, of course, do occupy the position of the moral judge. Sometimes other people do things and you find fault with it morally. You say, that was just wrong. How could you cheat on me? How could you, kill somebody that I loved? How could society have allowed this overreach of the criminal justice system that resulted in a misplaced charge or unjust conviction? So when you look at behavior, either by individuals or institutions, which you find wrong or morally righteous, then you're making moral judgments and you're engaged in moral reasoning. And sometimes it's you yourself. You've got a paper, you're thinking of plagiarizing it, and you're like, okay, I could turn this in and maybe I'll get away with it. But even if I do get away with it, wouldn't I experience a little bit of guilt knowing that I don't really, earn the merit that I'm trying to get from this professor? If you wrestle with that question, should I, shouldn't I do it? I'm an athlete, I want to succeed. There's these performance enhancing drugs, but the rules say I'm not supposed to take them. Nonetheless, maybe what if I take them and I don't get caught? Can that help me win? But is it even fair to win in that way? Would I feel like I did something wrong and that would kind of undermine the whole feeling of success or achievement? So when you make reasonable judgments about your own behavior on a moral basis or the behavior of others or whole societies or institutions, then you're engaged in moral reasoning. One thing quickly about the last point I made prior to this, that law and morality can be different from each other. Who makes laws? Legislators do. And those are just human beings with their own judgment. So you should think about moral judgment as the kind of judgment that these legislators would bring to the decision whether to establish a law or not. Take, for example, a decision made in the halls of Congress to criminalize, access to physician-assisted suicide or to approve of such access. When the legislator votes yay or nay, they themselves are the ones making an original decision using moral reasoning. They can't just defer to a higher court of authority. So the legislator, the congressperson, the senator, they cannot just say, well, I'm going to vote, but I'm going to vote based on what the law tells me to do, because you're making the law, right? So you should think about morality as the legislator who institutes the policies rather than just as the citizen who is subject to them. You're kind of going to be asked to engage in original and independent judgment about whether actions or behaviors or patterns of behavior are right or wrong, independently of what the judgment of law or society may be. Okay, so we talked about moral reasoning. We face these moral decisions, big and small, all day. A lot of times our moral reasoning processes are unconscious. They just kind of happen beneath our direct awareness. And we only sort of see the end product where we sort of feel like, man, that was really messed up. Or, wow, that was really impressive and noble. But oftentimes the reasoning that leads us to those moral conclusions is something that we don't actively think much about. It's kind of happening subconsciously, and then we just have our moral judgments that result from it. But we want to try and make our moral reasoning processes a little more self-aware to bring those within the scope of our direct awareness so that we can make better moral choices and be a little bit more conscious of ourselves doing it. So we're going to examine the connection between morality and happiness, distinguish between different types of values. We're going to try and talk about what's the difference between moral and non-moral values. And we will also describe the stages of moral development that have been charted out by psychologists and researchers who do think that humans have a tendency to develop in a gradual process according to 3 different developmental stages as you make your moral journey through life. Now, when it comes to morality and right and wrong and stuff like that, people are very, I think, resistant to reconsidering their own views that they're quite fond of. Right? Because people think that their moral views are some of the most cherished views, that they're the least willing to revisit or to re-examine. So that's where I think a lot of very passionate disagreements and arguments between people can arise. When it comes to the shape of the earth, is it flat or is it a sphere? Look, not many people believe that it's flat. Obviously, that's kind of ridiculous. But that debate is not a moral debate. It's a debate about the shape of the planet. Even there, people are going to be very deeply entrenched in their various views. But when it comes to moral disagreements, people, I think, are even more polarized. Like if one person says abortion's wrong and another person says, no, it's not wrong, it's going to be very hard for those two to have a civil discussion of ideas where they can see the other person's argument and just hear it out and take it seriously. So sometimes we have to almost like bend over backwards to compel ourselves to at least take an open-minded look at contrary moral arguments and positions. Because it's important for us to examine all the views that are out there and to take them honestly instead of just prejudging the outcome of our own moral reasoning. Okay. And Kayla, I did not want to be dismissive of your suggestion. The death sentence and execution, certainly many would argue that it's something that could be condemned on a moral basis. In fact, our own Governor Gavin Newsom put moratorium on the execution or the death sentence in California. So there's no people that are going to be executed in our state for as long as he's the governor. And there's a number of other governors who hold similar positions. Many people believe powerfully in the right to life, or they believe that it's government overreach to empower the state to execute citizens as a penalty. But I only mentioned that it's not the least controversial example because some people, of course, do believe that when you've got certain types of very extreme capital crimes, the victims and their families demand some type of restitution that rises to the level of a crime. So, there's that theory of retributivism in criminal justice. So that's a debate. But I think everyone can agree that slavery is wrong, unless you're really, really morally deviant. Okay, so next let's talk about these two different types of values that exist in ethics, which are mentioned in our book. So there's moral values and then non-moral values. So I'm going to put those here. Okay, so moral values. And that's contrasted with non-moral values. So first of all, moral values are values that benefit you and other people. So it's not just self-beneficial, but it's beneficial to others that you have these values. And they're considered good for their own sake. So I'll put that here. Values that benefit you and others and are considered good for their own sake. Okay, so they benefit you and other people, and they are considered good for their own sake. Moral values. So let me give you a couple of examples of values that are like that. The values that we have are the things that motivate and inspire us to our behavior and our moral actions. So when you have these moral values, they again are considered good for their own sake and they're beneficial all around, for you, but also for others with whom you interact. So examples of moral values. I'm going to actually erase this part so I have more room to give examples of this. So what could be some examples of moral values? Things like this: altruism, compassion, forgiveness. Justice. Okay, so those would be moral values. For example, say that you have this value that you apply to your everyday behavior, that you're a forgiving person, and that's a value that you hold dear. If you are forgiving, who does that benefit? Well, the person who has been forgiven by you benefits because now they can restore a friendly and amicable relationship with you, right? So that's more beneficial than if they were permanently shut out of your life with no hope for ever redeeming themselves. So it benefits the person who has been forgiven, but also you, the individual who is the forgiver, you benefit from that because the alternative to being forgiving is to hold resentment and hold grudges. And then you have to carry those resentful feelings and anger with you throughout your life, which is kind of to your own psychological disadvantage. So being forgiving is good for other people, but it's also good for you. And here's the thing about the third point. The quality of forgiveness as a moral value, it's also considered good for its own sake. meaning that it's considered a good thing even if it doesn't necessarily always reach the typical positive result. Okay, now a lot of times when you forgive people, that moves them, they're impressed by your display of forgiveness, and then they redeem themselves and behave better toward you in the future. But not in every single case, okay? We all know it can happen if it's a little sad, but can it happen that a person who you forgive double crosses you again and still, does something bad to you in the future even after you forgave them? Is that possible? Sure it is. But even when that happens, do we look at the forgiving person and say, why are you so forgiving? You're just a loser. I mean, that's a terrible quality. No, we usually say of the person, well, look, some people, they're unredeemable. You could forgive them and show them kindness, and they're still going to stab you in the back. But nonetheless, it's good that you're forgiving. It's better that you're forgiving than being such an unforgiving, standoffish, stubborn type of person. So we think of the quality of forgiveness as beneficial even when it doesn't in 100% of cases reach the desired outcome of restoring everyone to friendly relationships with each other. And it's the same with these others, right? So justice. Justice is treating people fairly, giving them what they deserve and not otherwise. Well, if you show fairness and justice to people, that of course is beneficial to them because they won't be disrespected, discriminated against, or abused, or exploited or manipulated, right? But it's also a good thing for you because when you know that you have a sense of justice and what's right, then you sleep better at night, as they say. You have a clear conscience, and you know that your example is one that is powerful and that would be a good example to even children, right? So having this beneficent, just sort of disposition towards people both benefits them and you. And even if, let's say, you were fair-minded to a person, but they still disrespected you afterwards, we would not say then you should just stop having that kind of just orientation towards people. We would still say it's of good value, even when it doesn't, let's say, derive any benefits. So it's good for its own sake. It's good in and of itself to be just or forgiving. Same with compassion, altruism. So those are moral values. And the text, and it's a classical thought that runs all the way through literally thousands of years of ethical philosophy, that it's probably a good idea for you to incorporate these moral values into your system of beliefs and into your behavior toward others. Because it's not just for the sake of everyone else that you have these values. It's also good and valuable to you, and it benefits you, the individual. So there's a kind of self-reinforcing reward mechanism here. The more that you establish and instill these characteristics in your own person, the better off and more benefited you'll be across your entire life. So hopefully that makes some good sense. Next up, I'm going to talk to you about the other side of this coin, or at least I'll try to get started on it because I know we're running low on time today. But we do have plenty of class time to finish all this stuff on ethics. So anyway, the other type of values are non-moral values. Okay, so non-moral values are values that are goal-oriented and are desired as a means to an end. Okay, so these are values that are goal-oriented and only desired as a means to an end. So these are a little more self-interested values. They're based on the desired pursuit of a goal that you have. And they're only considered valuable insofar as they lead to the attainment of that goal. So what are some examples of these so-called non-moral values? These are things like fame, popularity, wealth, or just prestige. So if you really value, let's say, being popular, then that could be one of these non-moral values. Because popularity, when you have it, it's useful towards the goal of being happier, right? People feel that like if they're popular, famous, everyone likes them, that makes them happier. And so why would one value being popular? Because of the means that is towards the goal, the end of personal satisfaction and happiness. Same with wealth, right? If you really value wealth, well, it's not a moral value, it's a non-moral value in the sense that why do you want wealth? You want it as a means to the attainment of goals that you've got, right? So you might want wealth so that you can buy a new house, new car, more entertaining video games or clothes, right? But the only reason you want that wealth and the only reason you have it as a value is because of the pursuit of the goals which it opens up and makes possible for you. Now, suppose though that wealth didn't bring happiness. Like there have been some people that say more money, more problems and all of that, right? So, and of course you all know about wealthy and famous people that have even committed suicide, right? So they clearly weren't even that happy, even though they had achieved all this great wealth. Now, if the wealth the person accumulated didn't make them happy, then there would be really no point to it, right? So these things are only desirable if and when they lead to the happiness that is the whole point behind them. But notice that they're not considered valuable for their own sake. Like fame isn't valued unless it led to some happiness for the person. That's different from like justice and forgiveness, which are valuable come what may, regardless of whether they actually led to a positive result. So these are a little more self-interested. You don't desire popularity, wealth, or prestige for the sake of others, but for the sake of the pursuit of your own goals, which they facilitate. And what's mentioned in the book is something I think important, which is that you should definitely have a healthy dose of the moral values sprinkled into the structure of your motivations in your everyday life. It shouldn't be that everything you do is merely based on the pursuit of these non-moral values, because in the end, if you don't actually care about other people in a deeper way than just being caught up in the pursuit of your own individual goals, then that can actually lead to higher levels of, depression, the feeling of meaninglessness, and a loss of connection with other people. So consider which values motivate your everyday decisions. The non-moral values such as wealth have been shown not to exactly control your ultimate happiness in the essential way. So the happiest and most self-satisfied life is going to incorporate some range, some measure of the moral values as well. People can, after pursuing wealth and pleasure and fame to its fullest extent, find that their lives are lacking in depth and substance. So not saying these are bad things. Certainly we all care about reaching our goals through these non-moral values, but without any kind of moral compass structuring your behavior and decisions, you can ultimately feel a little bit adrift, meaningless, and we all know that that's the recipe for an unsatisfied life. So the life that's the most valued and enduring in its overall quality is one that incorporates both kinds. And we're trying to be good critical thinkers, but also good moral reasoners. And there's also some scientific evidence to suggest that people who have better cognitive skill at just reasoning and arguing are also sometimes better at processing moral arguments and reasoning over those competing moral arguments as well. So there's really just an overlap and a spillover effect from being a good reasoner in the cognitive sense to being a good reasoner in the moral sense. So, okay, that's what I had for today, and we have reached the end of our class period. So thanks everybody who's attended today. Make sure that you pay attention to the announcement of the homework that's due on May 4th. And when we come back on Monday and Wednesday next week, after the weekend, we're simply going to continue on Chapter 9. So we have 2 more meetings where we'll fully describe the world of ethics in more depth, and then we're ready to start the review for the final after that. So I'll be grading your guys' quizzes over the weekend. They're not done just yet, but I need a little more time, so let's get back in touch over the weekend, and maybe I'll have them ready by Monday. Okay, guys, so unless there's any other extra questions or anything, I guess I'll let you go for now, but stay safe, have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.